As the sun dipped beneath the icy horizon, casting long shadows over the snow-covered plains, a cold wind howled across the land, a force so relentless that it seemed to have a life of its own. This was the world as it was in the harshest days of the Ice Age, an era when survival was not a matter of choice but of instinct, when the very elements seemed bent on destroying those who dared to live under their weight. The world was vast and unforgiving, the temperature plunging to levels so low that the air itself seemed to freeze in time. The frozen ground was hard as stone, and for miles there were no signs of life, no sound but the wind, no movement but the drift of snow. Yet in the midst of this desolation there was a small group of humans, a family huddled together in a shelter made of animal skins and bones. Their faces were drawn tight with the strain of survival, their eyes wide with the kind of fear that only the threat of death can produce. The fire they had lit burned weakly in the center of their shelter, casting flickering shadows on the walls, offering little warmth against the unrelenting cold outside. The wind outside shrieked like a beast, its icy claws scraping against the shelter as if it were trying to tear them apart. But inside there was a different kind of warmth, a warmth born not from the fire, but from something far deeper, the bond of family, the will to survive. These early humans, the ancestors of all that would follow, knew they were up against the greatest challenge of their lives. They had no advanced tools, no agriculture, no written language. What they had were their wits, their hands, and an innate understanding of the world around them. They could see the signs of the changing seasons, the shifts in the wind, the way the animals behaved. They knew the cold was coming, that the harshest days of the Ice Age were yet to arrive, and they had to prepare. The man of the family, a tall figure with skin hardened by the sun and wind, was sharpening a stone tool, his hands steady despite the freezing temperatures. His breath came in short, visible bursts, and every time he exhaled, it seemed to disappear into the air like a ghost. His gaze was fixed on the stone, his mind focused on the task at hand, but in the back of his mind he knew the stakes were higher than ever before. The world was changing, and if they were to survive, they had to adapt, to innovate, to create tools that would allow them to hunt, to protect their family, and to endure. This was no simple task. It was an act of defiance against the forces of nature, a declaration that they would not be broken, that they would endure. As the man worked, his thoughts turned to the generations that had come before him. They had survived because they were resourceful, because they were creative. They had learned to use the bones of animals to make tools, to craft weapons for hunting, to build shelters that could withstand the fiercest storms. And now, as the wind howled outside, it was their legacy that he carried with him. This moment, this struggle, was not just for survival, it was for the future of humanity itself. Outside the shelter, the landscape stretched out endlessly, a frozen wasteland that seemed to go on forever. The sky was a dull gray, heavy with the promise of a coming storm, and the ground was covered in a blanket of snow, smooth and untouched. The world seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to happen, and in that silence the family huddled together, their warmth shared, their survival shared. They knew that the future was uncertain, that the cold would come again, that the ice would advance, but they also knew that as long as they had each other, as long as they could adapt, they would survive. And in that survival there was hope, hope that their children would live to see another season, hope that they would one day tell their story to those who came after them. But for now there was only the cold, only the fire, and the steady rhythm of their lives as they prepared for the unknown. The wind outside seemed to grow stronger, the snow swirling in wild patterns, and for a moment it felt as though the world itself was closing in around them. But the family held firm, united by their will to survive, by their ingenuity, and by their unwavering belief that they could endure no matter what the world threw at them. They were human, and that in itself was their greatest strength. The man finished sharpening the stone tool, his fingers numb from the cold, but his resolve unbroken. He looked up at his family, his eyes meeting those of his wife and children, and for a moment he felt a deep sense of pride. They had made it this far, and they would make it further still. They had faced the worst the world could throw at them, and they had survived. They would continue to survive, because that was what humans did. They adapted, they overcame, and they thrived. And so as the wind howled outside and the cold pressed in, they settled in for the night, knowing that the challenges of the future would be just as great, but that they had the strength to face them together. The fire crackled, the shadows danced on the walls, and the family, bound by blood and by the will to survive, closed their eyes, ready to face whatever the dawn might bring. The story of humanity had only just begun, but it was already written in the bones of those who had come before, in the very blood that flowed through their veins. This was a story of survival, of resilience, and of the unyielding power of the human spirit. And as the night fell and the world around them grew colder still, the fire of hope burned brightly in their hearts, a flame that would never go out, no matter how fierce the winds of the ice age became. But as they lay in their shelter, unaware of what the next days would bring, the world around them was shifting once more. The winds, which had been howling for days, were now quiet, and the temperature was beginning to drop even further. Far to the north, the glaciers were expanding, creeping southward with a slow but inexorable force. The earth was in the midst of a dramatic transformation, one that would change the course of history forever. The Ice Age was not merely a cold period in Earth's history. It was the birth of a new world, a world that would shape the future of humanity. The family in the shelter was just one small part of a much larger story, a story that spanned the entire globe, a story that had begun long before their ancestors had ever taken their first breath. For tens of thousands of years, humanity had faced the brutality of nature, and yet each time it seemed that they might be defeated, they adapted, they learned, they thrived. This was the legacy of the human race, the will to survive, to create, and to overcome. And as the world outside grew colder, as the winds began to howl once more, the family in the shelter would be forced to confront the harshest trials of all. Would they survive the coming storm? Would they be able to endure the growing cold and the advancing glaciers? Only time would tell. But for now, in the stillness of the night, there was only the fire, the warmth of family, and the quiet certainty that they would face whatever came together as one. In the shadow of the great ice sheets, the world seemed to hold its breath. The earth, covered in a deep, suffocating frost, bore witness to the fragile dance of survival as early humans huddled together in the face of an unrelenting winter. But they were not defeated. No, it was in these extreme moments of desperation that humanity found its deepest reserves of strength, creativity, and determination. As the glaciers moved like slow giants, swallowing forests and reshaping continents, the world around them was an unrecognizable landscape. The once fertile plains had turned into barren, frozen deserts. The rivers that had once coursed with life, now just dry, cracked beds. Yet within this vast and harsh wilderness, the human spirit persevered, pushing the boundaries of survival in a way that would lay the groundwork for everything that followed. This was not the beginning of humanity's story, but a crucial chapter in the ongoing saga of adaptation and resilience. And it was within this chapter that the early seeds of civilization began to take root. The air was frigid, the ground hard and unforgiving, yet the fire of human ingenuity burned bright. Through the ingenuity of stone tools and the mastery of fire, our ancestors began to carve out an existence from the very rock and ice that sought to destroy them. They adapted, using their environment not just as a threat to their survival, but as a canvas upon which they could paint their future. But this was no simple survival story. This was a story of profound transformation, of a species that, against all odds, found ways to bend the world to its will. The evidence of this transformation is written not only in the bones of ancient hunters and gatherers, but also in the deep layers of the earth itself. Archaeological discoveries have uncovered the bones of mammoths, mastodons, and other prehistoric creatures that once roamed the landscape, only to be hunted by our ancestors who were rapidly learning to master their environment. Fossils of early humans show the toll this brutal environment took on their bodies, the scars of frostbite and malnutrition etched into their skin and bones. But the same bones also tell of survival, of the unimaginable hardships that were faced and overcome. Genetic studies have traced the steps of humanity's evolution, revealing how early humans, through their struggles against the cold and hunger, became stronger, more resilient. Their DNA reflects the changes that took place over generations as they adapted to ever-changing climates, evolving to withstand the harshest of conditions. It was not just their bodies that adapted, but their minds as well. Early humans were not only surviving, but they were learning, growing, creating. They began to develop tools with greater complexity, carving weapons that were not just functional but beautiful, adorned with intricate designs that reflected the growing artistry of the time. These tools, crafted from bone, stone, and wood, allowed them to hunt more efficiently, to defend themselves, to shape their world in ways that had never been imagined before. Yet, even as humanity was learning to harness the elements, the earth itself was changing. The glaciers that had once been a permanent fixture on the landscape began to retreat, signaling the end of one era and the beginning of another. As the ice melted, it released the waters trapped in its frozen grip, flooding the land and reshaping entire ecosystems. The once familiar landscape was no longer the same. Forests began to emerge, replacing the icy tundra, bringing new forms of life with them. The rivers, once dry and cracked, began to flow again, their waters nourishing the land and allowing new plants and animals to flourish. But with this transformation came new challenges. The environment was no longer a constant force to be reckoned with. It was now a volatile, unpredictable entity that could change from one season to the next. Early humans found themselves not just battling the cold, but also the wild forces of nature, from volcanic eruptions to floods that could wipe out entire communities. And yet, in the face of these challenges, they did not retreat. Instead, they adapted once again. The evidence of this is found in the archaeological record, in the remnants of ancient communities that faced these environmental shifts head-on. From the deserts of the Middle East to the forests of Europe, early humans learned to not just survive, but to thrive in their new environments. They began to form communities, to build shelter, to create art, and to craft tools that were more advanced than anything they had ever made before. But it was not just their environment that shaped their journey. It was also their interactions with each other. As communities began to form, they created bonds that were not just based on family, but also on shared survival. The relationships that formed in these early societies were vital to the survival of the group, and it was through these connections that humanity began to flourish. The cultural practices that emerged during this time, from art and storytelling to social rituals, provided a foundation for the societies that would eventually follow. These early humans, in their struggle against the cold, hunger, and isolation, had begun to create something far greater than mere survival. They were building the foundations of civilization. As the earth continued to shift, so too did humanity's place in the world. The Ice Age gave way to a new era, one in which early humans began to spread out across the planet, leaving their mark on every continent. In the far north, they hunted the last of the great mammoths, while in the tropics they learned to cultivate crops and settle in permanent villages. But no matter where they went, they carried with them the lessons of their struggle against the Ice Age. These lessons were not just about survival. They were about adaptation, resilience, and the ability to face the unknown with courage and creativity. They were about the power of human ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds. And it is this power, this indomitable will to survive and to thrive, that has carried humanity through the ages, through the Ice Age and beyond. As the years passed, the descendants of these early survivors would go on to build great cities, to conquer new frontiers, and to achieve feats that seemed impossible. But none of this would have been possible without the lessons learned during those early frozen days. For it was in the harshest of environments, in the face of the greatest challenges, that humanity's true strength was forged. And it is this strength, this enduring spirit of resilience, that continues to guide us as we face the challenges of our own time. As we look to the future, we can draw inspiration from the struggles and triumphs of our ancestors. They were not just survivors. They were creators, innovators, and builders of worlds. And in their story, we find not just a reflection of our past, but a vision for our future. It is a future built on the foundation of the resilience, creativity, and adaptability that have defined humanity throughout the ages. A future in which we, too, can face the challenges of our time with the same determination and ingenuity that allowed our ancestors to thrive in the frozen wilderness. The fire burns low as the family settles into the cave, the night stretching long and cold. But even in the frozen world outside, there is warmth inside these walls. The man's hands are still rough from the day's work, a reminder of the labor that goes into every meal, every tool, every piece of shelter. His daughter, now sitting quietly beside her mother, molds the clay in her hands, her fingers working with the skill of someone who has already begun to understand the importance of creativity in this world of survival. She is learning to fashion things, to build from the earth, and her creations are more than just play. They are a lifeline, an expression of human resilience in the face of overwhelming adversity. In the quiet, The father watches his family, his heart swelling with pride. His son, the one who would one day take up the mantle of leadership, is already sharpening a spear, his small hands gripping the weapon with determination. It is a moment of normalcy in a world that is anything but. But that peace is fragile, like the fire that flickers in the corner of the cave. The wind outside howls like a beast, an animal of the earth seeking to devour all in its path. But inside, the family remains strong. Their breath fills the cave with a rhythm of its own steady, constant, a reminder that they are alive, they are here, and they will continue to be. Outside the storms rage, but inside there is hope. Tomorrow they will venture forth, leaving the relative safety of the cave for the brutal wilderness. Tomorrow they will face the hunt. They will face the mammoth. The challenge of survival lies not just in finding food, but in ensuring their place in this savage, unforgiving world. There is no certainty, no guarantee that they will return, but there is trust in their skill, in their bond, in their unity as a family. The father looks out into the night, his mind racing, calculating the risks. He knows the land better than most, has tracked the great beasts for years, but there is always danger, always uncertainty. Still, he does not falter. He cannot. The cold may seek to take their lives, the hunger may threaten to break them, but their strength lies in their unity, in the fire that burns within them. The family has been through too much together to let this moment slip away. The next day, as the sky begins to lighten with the faintest blush of dawn, the father gathers the family together, his voice low but firm. Today we hunt. Today we survive. His son looks up at him, his young eyes filled with both determination and fear. He is ready, but not yet fully formed. The father sees the potential in him, the fire that will one day become a flame to lead others. But for now, it is the father's role to guide, to teach, to protect. They leave the cave, stepping into the icy world with the cold wind biting at their faces. The earth is covered in a thick layer of snow, a pristine white that stretches endlessly before them. The world is eerily silent, save for the crunch of their footsteps in the snow. As they move deeper into the wilderness, the father leads with confidence, his every step calculated, his every movement deliberate. He is teaching his son without words, showing him how to read the land, how to track the animals, how to understand the rhythm of nature. They pass by the remains of a fallen tree, the bark stripped away by the cold, the branches twisted and gnarled. The father pauses for a moment, touching the rough surface, then motions for his son to follow. "The land speaks to us," he says quietly. "Every mark, every change tells us something. You must learn to listen." They continue onward, their breath visible in the frozen air, the sound of the wind howling around them like a warning. The father scans the horizon, his sharp eyes searching for any sign of movement. In the distance, he sees it a lone mammoth, its massive form barely visible through the swirling snow. The beast moves with a slow, deliberate pace, its fur thick and matted against the cold. It is a creature of the ice, born of this harsh world, and it is both a symbol of strength and a reminder of the dangers they face. The family pauses, the tension palpable in the air. They know this hunt will not be easy. The mammoth is a formidable opponent, but it is also a necessity. It is their only hope for food, for warmth, for survival. The father turns to his son, his face grim but resolute. "Today you will learn," he says. The hunt begins. It is a slow, methodical pursuit, the family moving in synchrony, their movements quiet and calculated. The snow beneath their feet is thick, making every step a challenge. But they press on, determined, driven by the need to survive. As they close in on the mammoth, the father's heart races, his mind sharp and focused. He watches the beast, its every movement, every breath, every step. It is a dance, a battle of wills, and only one will emerge victorious. The mammoth is unaware of their approach, its massive head lowered as it searches for food, its huge tusks brushing against the snow. The family moves closer, their weapons ready, their minds attuned to the rhythm of the hunt. The son grips his spear tightly, his hands shaking slightly with both excitement and fear. He is ready, but he is not yet fully prepared for the weight of what they are about to do. The moment is tense, the air thick with anticipation. And then the father nods. The spear is thrown, a blur of motion, and the mammoth roars in pain, its massive body jerking in response. The hunt is on, but the beast is not easily defeated. It charges, its massive form a blur of fury and strength, its tusks aimed at the family with terrifying speed. The ground shakes beneath their feet as the mammoth charges, its roar deafening. The family scatters, moving quickly, evading the beast's charge with agility honed by years of survival in this brutal world. The son is knocked to the ground, his spear flying from his hand, but he quickly recovers, rising to his feet with a determination that comes from deep within. He knows what is at stake. He knows that this fight is not just for food, it is for life. The family regroups, moving together as a unit, their movements coordinated, their focus unbroken. The father's eyes are locked on the mammoth, his every sense attuned to the beast. This is not just a hunt, it is a test of everything they have learned, everything they have become. And in the end, it is their unity that will decide their fate. The final blow comes swiftly, the father's spear plunging deep into the mammoth's side, a victory born of strategy, skill, and sheer willpower. The mammoth falls, its massive body crashing to the ground with a deafening thud. The family stands together, breathless, their hearts racing, their bodies aching from the exertion. They have survived, and they have done so together. In the aftermath of the hunt, as they begin the laborious task of butchering the mammoth, the father looks at his son, his expression one of pride and quiet understanding. The boy has grown today, has learned what it truly means to survive. And though there will be more challenges ahead, though the world will continue to be harsh and unforgiving, the family knows this. Together they are unstoppable. The hunt is not just a physical struggle, it is a reminder of their strength, their resilience, and their unbreakable bond. It is a testament to the spirit of humanity, to the will to endure, to adapt, and to thrive in the face of adversity. As the sun begins to set on the icy horizon, casting long shadows across the snow, the family makes their way back to the cave, their hearts full of the knowledge that they have overcome yet another trial. They are tired, their bodies aching, but there is no time for rest. Tomorrow the hunt will begin again, for the world waits for no one. And so they press on, driven by the same force that has carried humanity through millennia, the will to survive, the will to live, the will to fight for the future. The winds of the Ice Age swept relentlessly across the earth, its icy breath a constant reminder of nature's unyielding power. Yet, within this frozen world of desolation, humanity began to carve its place. With each passing day, the struggle for survival became a test of not just endurance, but of ingenuity. The ancient humans, whose lives were shaped by the unforgiving cold, did not simply endure the elements. They learned to manipulate them, turning what seemed like an insurmountable challenge into an opportunity for growth. They fashioned tools from the bones of mammoths and the stones of the earth, each one meticulously crafted to ensure survival. Every strike of a stone against another was a deliberate act of defiance against the forces of nature. In this battle between human creativity and the elements, it was clear the earth might seek to destroy, but humanity would always seek to rebuild. These tools, honed with the sharpness of necessity, became extensions of human will. The very materials that were considered obstacles by nature, stone, bone, tusk, became the foundation of survival. Where once there was only barren ice, now there were sharp blades, carving through hides, cutting through bone, and preparing meat for the harsh days ahead. The relentless cold of the environment tried to steal their warmth, yet early humans responded with their own fire. The warmth of the fire became not only a physical source of survival, but a symbol of their strength. It was around this fire that families gathered, that the bonds of community were forged, and that the first sparks of creativity were ignited. In the flicker of flames, early humans crafted their stories, their legends, etched into the walls of their shelters. Art, born from the harshness of survival, reflected their deepest struggles and their most profound triumphs. These paintings, scratched into stone and drawn with the ash of their fires, told of hunts, of victories, of moments when the human spirit triumphed over the merciless forces of nature. Yet, even as their creativity blossomed, the world around them was shifting. The ice age, ever present, was not a constant. It was a force that ebbed and flowed, a cycle of destruction and rebirth. Volcanic eruptions, climatic shifts, and the looming threat of ice sheets pushing further south made the environment even more hostile. It was not just a fight for food and shelter. It was a fight for survival itself, a battle for existence in a world that seemed to be fighting back. But within this chaos, human innovation thrived. The shelters they built were not just temporary havens. They were masterpieces of adaptation. Constructed from the bones of massive beasts and the hides of the very animals they hunted, these structures stood as both shields against the elements and as symbols of humanity's capacity to endure. The harsh winds outside howled in fury, but inside, the warmth of the fire, the strength of community, and the spirit of innovation kept them safe. Every shelter was a small, sacred space of human achievement. As the earth trembled beneath their feet, as glaciers advanced and retreated, as the world seemed to change before their very eyes, the human spirit remained resolute. It was in these moments of extreme challenge that the true power of human resilience was revealed. When the storms raged and the cold numbed their bones, early humans didn't simply retreat. They pushed forward, using the resources around them in ways that no other species could have imagined. The mammoth, which seemed like an unstoppable force of nature in its own right, was transformed into a source of sustenance and raw material. The tusks of these mighty beasts were shaped into tools of unimaginable utility. What nature intended as a brutal challenge became a gift, each tusk, bone, and piece of hide a raw material for survival. These early humans did not simply survive, they adapted. They understood the land they lived on better than any other creature, reading the signs of the seasons, tracking the movements of animals, and anticipating the ever-changing rhythms of nature. They had no written language, but the knowledge passed down through generations was invaluable. It was this accumulated wisdom that allowed them to outlast the harsher winters and warmer summers, the volcanic ash that choked the skies, and the glaciers that swallowed the land. They became masters of their environment. They learned to create clothing from the skins of the animals they hunted, protecting their bodies from the cold with garments that were not only functional but beautifully crafted. These clothes, designed with the precision of survival, allowed them to withstand the brutal cold while also providing the flexibility needed for hunting and daily life. The artistry in these garments was a reflection of the human drive to create, to express, and to survive. The mastery over their environment did not stop with clothing and shelter. They used their understanding of fire to cook food, a critical step in ensuring they received the nutrients they needed to survive in such a harsh world. Cooking not only made food more digestible, but it also brought families together. The communal meals around the fire were moments of bonding, of shared humanity. It was in these moments that the concept of community took root, as the fire became the focal point of their lives, a gathering place where stories were told, traditions were passed down, and creativity flowed. The harsh environment might have been unyielding, but the creativity, determination, and ingenuity of early humans were more than a match for it. Every challenge they faced was met with a solution, whether that solution was a new tool, a new technique for hunting, or a new way to adapt their shelters to the ever-changing climate. These early humans did not just survive, they thrived. They built a foundation that would become the bedrock of future civilizations. But even as they adapted, even as they crafted their lives from the bones of beasts and the ice of the earth, they could not ignore the global changes that were happening around them. The planet itself was undergoing a transformation that would change the course of history. The climate shifted in ways that no one could predict, sending waves of cold further south and turning fertile landscapes into barren deserts. The volcanic eruptions that darkened the skies and the sudden temperature drops became part of the backdrop of their daily lives. Yet, through all of this, humanity persisted. It was in these times of trial that the true character of humanity emerged. Where others might have crumbled, humans rose up, finding ways to survive not just through brute strength, but through intelligence, creativity, and resilience. The world around them was changing, but so were they. The story of early humans is not one of mere survival. It is a story of triumph against impossible odds. It is a story of how, in the face of a world that seemed determined to wipe them out, they used their creativity to carve out a future. As the ice advanced, as the skies darkened, and as the world trembled beneath their feet, humanity stood resilient. The ingenuity they displayed in building shelters, crafting tools, and finding food became the foundation upon which the future was built. Their story is a testament to the power of human innovation, the strength of community, and the unyielding will to survive. It is a story that echoes through time, a story that continues to inspire those who face their own challenges in a world that is often as unforgiving as the Ice Age. As the earth shifts and changes once more, we remember the legacy of these early humans, whose ingenuity and perseverance laid the groundwork for everything that would come after them. Their triumph over the harshness of their world is a reminder that, no matter the adversity, humanity can and will find a way. The world trembles beneath the weight of an unforgiving winter, a frozen wasteland where survival is not merely a struggle, but an art. The wind screams across the tundra, biting into the flesh of all who dare to venture out. The Ice Age stretches its grip over every living creature, from the mighty mammoth to the tiniest mouse, and yet in this desolation human beings persist, carving out a life in the harshest of environments. It is in this bleak, unyielding land that humanity learns to adapt, to overcome, and to thrive despite the odds. As the temperature plummets and the earth itself seems to recoil in fear, a new kind of relationship begins to form, one between humans and the very animals they rely on for survival. This connection, forged through necessity, evolves into a delicate dance of respect, fear, and mutual reliance. From the towering herds of mammoths that roam the frozen plains to the elusive reindeer that sprint across the snow-covered forests, every animal is a potential lifeline, and every encounter a battle between life and death. Yet it is not just the sheer force of nature that these early humans must contend with. A shifting climate, unpredictable and cruel, creates a world where resources are scarce and the survival of all species is uncertain. It is this constant state of flux that demands innovation, where every day could bring a new challenge. A pack of wolves closing in on a vulnerable herd of reindeer, a sudden blizzard erasing all signs of food, or a volcanic eruption blanketing the land in ash and dust. In this unforgiving landscape, the human-animal bond becomes a sacred pact, one where trust, cunning, and ingenuity are the only means of survival. But even the mightiest of beasts are not invincible. The mammoth, with its towering tusks and thick fur, may seem unstoppable, but as the climate grows colder and the ice spreads, the food sources it depends on begin to dwindle. The once fertile plains become barren, and the great herds that once roamed the earth in their thousands are now scattered, their numbers slowly dwindling, their once proud presence fading into memory. Yet, for humanity, the relationship with these animals is not just about survival, but about understanding. The mammoth, for all its power, becomes a symbol of what it means to coexist with nature, to live in harmony with the land, and to respect the creatures that share it. The humans of this time do not merely hunt. They learn, adapt, and innovate. The tools they craft, from finely made spears to intricate traps, are not just instruments of death, but extensions of their understanding of the world around them. They learn the ways of the animals, the tracks they leave in the snow, the sound of their calls in the distance, the patterns of their migration. Each hunt is not just a fight for food, but a battle of wits, a test of endurance and skill, a moment where life and death hang in the balance. But survival is not solely dependent on the ability to hunt. It is the environment itself that shapes these early humans, forcing them to adapt in ways that will echo through the ages. The ever-shifting climate, from the icy chill of the Ice Age to the warmer periods that follow, pushes humanity to develop new methods of shelter, clothing, and sustenance. It is in these moments of ingenuity, when the cold becomes unbearable, that humanity demonstrates its true resilience. The crafting of fire becomes an act of life and death, a flicker of warmth in a world of eternal frost. The creation of shelter, from caves to mammoth-skin tents, is not just a means of protection, but a testament to human creativity and resourcefulness. Even in the face of the greatest challenges, there is a warmth that persists. It is found in the bonds of family and community, in the shared joy of a successful hunt, in the celebration of life against all odds. These moments of connection, of artistry and expression, are the threads that weave together the fabric of humanity's story. As the world shifts around them, these early humans do not simply endure. They thrive, carving out a life in the most inhospitable of environments. They are the survivors, the innovators, the dreamers who rise above the harshness of nature and continue to push forward, ever onward. But their story is not one of unchecked triumph. For every victory there are losses. For every gain there is a price. The ever-present threat of extinction looms over all, a constant reminder of the delicate balance between humanity and the creatures with whom they share the earth. The megafauna, once rulers of the frozen world, began to vanish, leaving behind only skeletal remains and faded memories. The mammoths, the saber-toothed tigers, the giant sloths all fade into the shadows of history, victims of a changing world. Yet, despite the losses, the relationship between humans and animals endures. The lessons learned from these great beasts, from the ways they roamed the earth, from the survival strategies they employed, are passed down from generation to generation. And in this way the cycle of life continues, as humanity looks to the future with a deep respect for the natural world that has sustained them. As the seasons shift and the temperatures rise, new challenges await. The ice age may be fading, but the story of survival, of ingenuity, and of the eternal bond between humans and the animals they rely on continues to unfold, a testament to the strength and resilience of the human spirit. Through every storm, every freeze, and every challenge, one thing remains certain: humanity's ability to adapt, to innovate, and to thrive in the face of nature's most brutal forces is a story that will never be forgotten. It is a story of strength, of hope, and of the enduring connection between all living things. Yet, as the ice begins to recede, new challenges emerge. The warming world brings its own set of threats: droughts, floods, and the ever-present fear of scarcity. As the ice melts and the earth begins to thaw, the landscape changes. The once dominant mammoth, its massive bulk and towering tusks, an icon of the past, becomes increasingly rare. The animals that once roamed in great herds are now isolated, their populations dwindling as they struggle to adapt to the changing environment. The reindeer, once abundant, now find themselves facing new predators in the form of shifting ecosystems and changing prey patterns. For the humans, these changes are not just a matter of survival, but of adaptation. The familiar patterns of life, the seasonal migrations, the hunting grounds, the trusted techniques are no longer as reliable. They must evolve or risk being left behind by the rapidly changing world. Yet in these trials, new tools emerge. The art of fishing, once a peripheral skill, becomes a cornerstone of human life, as the once frozen rivers and lakes now teem with life. Fishing nets are woven, spears are sharpened for aquatic hunts, and the landscape shifts from ice to water, from snow to mud. With each new environment, humanity adapts, building upon the lessons learned from their ancestors. The fires they started to warm themselves now become a beacon of civilization, guiding them through the ever-changing world. The animals, too, adapt. Some, like the reindeer, grow smaller, more agile, while others, like the woolly mammoth, slowly vanish into the pages of history. Yet, even as these great beasts fade, their legacy remains. They have shaped the world as much as the humans who relied on them. And in this ever-evolving landscape, the bond between humanity and the animal kingdom continues to shift, forming new alliances, new challenges, and new victories. The ancient art of storytelling becomes the vessel through which humanity passes down their wisdom, their victories, and their losses. The fires of the hearth flicker late into the night as people gather to share their stories, recounting the great hunts, the battles with the elements, and the lessons learned from the creatures of the earth. These stories, passed down through generations, become the lifeblood of culture, a way for humanity to remember the bonds they forged with nature and the animals that made their survival possible. The Ice Age may be over, but the lessons of that time, the resilience, the ingenuity, and the profound connection between humanity and the natural world endure. And as the climate continues to shift, as the world continues to change, one thing is clear: the struggle for survival is never over. It is an ongoing dance between humanity and nature, a story of adaptation, of change, and of the unbreakable bond between all living things. In this epic tale of survival, triumph, and loss, the humans of the Ice Age become more than mere survivors. They become the architects of a future that will echo through the ages. Their ingenuity, their connection to the land, and their unyielding will to thrive against all odds will shape the course of history, leaving a legacy that will resonate for millennia to come. And as we look back on their story, we are reminded that the struggle for survival is not just a matter of enduring the elements, but of understanding, adapting, and forging relationships with the world around us. The animals, the land, the climate, all are part of the intricate web of life, and in this web, humanity has always been, and will always be, a part. It is a story that will never be forgotten, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit and the timeless bond between humans and the animals that made their survival possible. The land was relentless, a frozen wilderness where the very air seemed to bite at your skin, a world where survival was not a choice, but a fierce, unyielding demand of nature. The sun's feeble rays barely reached the earth, casting long, cold shadows over the jagged ice and deep snow. These were the days of the Ice Age, a time when the planet trembled under the weight of glaciers that stretched for miles, crushing everything in their path. But within this icy expanse, hidden deep in the crags of the mountains and the caves in the earth, a quiet revolution was unfolding, one of survival, ingenuity, and an unshakable bond between the people who fought to live and the world that fought to destroy them. The struggle was epic, as human beings learned not only to survive but to thrive in the most uninhabitable of places. Amid the brutal cold, families huddled together in caves, their warmth rising from the fires they so carefully tended. The crackling flames cast eerie shadows on the walls, flickering over the primitive paintings that adorned the cave's interior. These images, drawn in ochre and charcoal, told stories of hunts, of animals that roamed the land, and of the people who dared to chase them. Each stroke was a testament to human creativity, a spark of life in a world that offered little. Yet these images were more than just decorations. They were part of something much larger. They were symbols of survival, of faith, and of a world where art was as necessary for survival as the tools they forged. The act of painting was not just an artistic endeavor, but a way of connecting with the spirits of the animals they hunted, a way of ensuring success in their struggle against the environment. These early humans understood that survival was not just about the physical, about hunting, gathering, and building shelter, but about the spiritual, the intangible. They believed that by capturing the essence of the creatures they hunted, they could exert control over them, that by painting their likenesses on the walls of their caves, they could guarantee a bountiful hunt. As the days grew colder and the nights longer, the bonds between the members of these early communities became stronger. Elders taught the young ones how to create tools from bone and stone, their hands steady as they shaped the rough materials into something functional, something that could ensure their survival. Children watched in awe, absorbing the lessons that would one day allow them to take their place in this unbroken chain of human resilience. It was a community united not just by blood, but by a shared sense of purpose, an unspoken understanding that only together could they hope to endure the challenges of the environment. The roles within these communities were fluid, but the respect for the elders was unwavering. These were the keepers of knowledge, the storytellers, the ones who passed down the history of their people from one generation to the next. Their wisdom was seen not as an individual strength, but as a collective treasure that bound the community together. Children were not just taught the practical skills of survival. They were also taught the cultural rituals, the beliefs that governed their world. At the heart of these rituals was a reverence for the land, for the animals, and for the unseen forces that shaped their lives. The power of the elements of fire, wind, water, and ice was acknowledged in every prayer, in every chant, in every dance. Life in this brutal age was a constant balancing act between reverence for the forces that could destroy you and the ingenuity to create tools that could help you survive. And so the community grew not just in numbers, but in complexity. They began to trade sharing their tools, their food, their knowledge with neighboring tribes. What began as a struggle for survival slowly evolved into something more. The earliest forms of cooperation emerged: barter systems, the sharing of resources, and the building of alliances. The human spirit, tested by the harshest elements, began to shape not just the land, but the very fabric of society. The ancient trade routes, though crude, were forged across the landscape, stretching from one community to the next, connecting them in ways that would eventually lay the foundation for future civilizations. These early humans knew the value of cooperation, of working together for the common good. They understood that survival was not an individual endeavor, but a communal one. In the face of nature's brutality, they had learned that only through collaboration could they hope to endure. And as they adapted to their environment, they adapted to one another. The role of the family was central in these societies. Each member had their place, each role vital for the group's survival. But within this structure, there was room for growth, for change, for innovation. The younger generation was not bound by the traditions of their forebears, but was encouraged to think differently, to challenge the status quo. The creation of new tools, the discovery of new hunting grounds, the establishment of new methods of food preservation, all of these were the result of a society that encouraged innovation while honoring the wisdom of its elders. It was a balance of respect for the past and a fearless drive toward the future. The environment, however, remained unforgiving. Temperatures plummeted even further, reaching levels that no human had ever known. The land, already scarred by the advances of glaciers, began to show signs of further upheaval. The earth trembled with the force of volcanic eruptions, the skies darkened with ash, and the air itself seemed to suffocate under the weight of the changing climate. These were not just natural occurrences. They were harbingers of a new epoch, one that would shape the course of human history forever. The very fabric of the earth seemed to be unraveling, and with it, the delicate balance of life that these early humans had worked so hard to maintain. Yet through it all, the people persevered. They adapted to the shifting landscape, finding new ways to hunt, to gather, and to build. They crafted shelter from the bones of the animals they hunted, using every part of the creature to create something that would protect them from the elements. The tools they created were not just functional but beautiful, carved with intricate designs that spoke to the deep connection they felt with the natural world. Every object they made was imbued with meaning. Every act of survival was an act of creation, an affirmation of life in the face of annihilation. As the climate grew harsher, the importance of community and culture became even more pronounced. Rituals, now more than ever, played a crucial role in maintaining social cohesion. The ceremonies, the dances, the songs, these were not just entertainment, but essential elements of survival. They reinforced the bonds between individuals, between families, and between tribes. They reminded everyone of their place in the world, of their connection to each other, and to the land that sustained them. The people had learned to live in harmony with the environment, not by conquering it, but by understanding it. In doing so, they had transformed their struggle for survival into something much greater, into a testament to the power of human ingenuity, to the strength of the human spirit, and to the unbreakable bond that existed between people and the world they inhabited. This was the dawn of culture, of art, of society, born not from ease, but from the fires of adversity. The Ice Age was more than just a period of brutal cold. It was the crucible in which humanity's capacity for resilience, for creativity, and for cooperation was forged. And as the ice began to recede and the world slowly warmed, the echoes of these early humans would be felt for millennia to come, their legacy living on in the stories they told, and the art they created, and in the societies they built from the ashes of the past. But the human story did not end there. The fall of the glaciers did not mark the end of struggle, but the beginning of a new chapter, one in which the lessons of survival would shape the foundations of a new world. As the ice retreated, the land began to reveal itself in new and unexpected ways. The flora and fauna that had been buried beneath the sheets of ice for so long began to flourish, and with it, new opportunities for human survival and adaptation. The people who had once huddled in caves now began to settle on the plains, to build permanent structures, to farm the land they had once roamed as hunters and gatherers. The earth itself seemed to pulse with a new vitality, and humanity was ready to seize it. But even as they began to adapt to this warmer world, they could not forget the harsh lessons of the past. The winds of change that had brought the end of the Ice Age would soon stir again, bringing with them new challenges, new trials that would test humanity's resolve. The rise of early civilizations with their intricate social structures and new technologies would emerge from the roots of this ancient struggle. The fires that had once been kindled in caves, under the flickering shadows of paintings and rituals, would burn brightly in the hearts of the people who would go on to shape the world as we know it. And so, in the heart of the Ice Age, in the frozen wastelands where survival had once seemed impossible, humanity found its resilience. It found its strength not in conquering the earth, but in understanding it, in living with it, in transforming every obstacle into an opportunity for growth. The story of our ancestors, of those who lived through the Ice Age and beyond, is one of unyielding perseverance, of a people who defied the odds, who thrived in the face of destruction, and who left behind a legacy that would inspire generations to come. The fire flickered weakly in the midst of the storm, its warm glow a stark contrast to the cruel winds that howled outside. The ground beneath the feet of the survivors was as unforgiving as the climate itself. It was the age of the ice, a time when the earth's breath grew cold and the sun's warmth became a distant memory. This was not the beginning of humanity's struggle, but a chapter in a long, unbroken history of resilience. Centuries had passed, generations of humans had come and gone, and yet the battle against the elements, against a world that seemed to conspire against their survival, remained unchanged. The cold had become their constant companion, but they had learned over centuries of hardship that survival was not merely a matter of endurance, it was a matter of transformation. The world, their world, had been reshaped by a cataclysmic shift, the end of the Pleistocene epoch and the onset of a global crisis that threatened to wipe out life as they knew it. The earth had frozen in what would later be remembered as the Ice Age. Yet, mankind had endured. From the vast plains of the steppe to the high caves nestled in the mountains, from the desert's edge to the great forests that stretched across Europe and Asia, small pockets of life had held out. And it was in these pockets, where the cold was most unforgiving, that the seeds of resilience were sown. The struggle for warmth, for food, for safety, these were the daily trials they faced, yet they were also the crucible in which humanity's greatest tools, its greatest technologies, were born. The creation of fire, that life-giving warmth, was perhaps humanity's first great triumph. Through the endless darkness of winter, the survivors had mastered it. The fire that allowed them to cook meat, preserve food, ward off the predators that lurked in the night, and most of all to gather around in solidarity and share their stories. These were the moments that made survival more than mere existence. They were the moments that transformed survival into something sacred. They had learned to craft tools from bone and stone, carving out a life from the barren landscape, shaping their survival with hands that had once been nothing more than tools of nature themselves. They built shelters that could withstand the harshest storms, learning the rhythm of the seasons, knowing when the winds would shift and when the cold would become unbearable. They had, in a sense, become creatures of the cold themselves, adapting to it, living in harmony with it, while never losing sight of their humanity. But the struggle did not end with the Ice Age. Nature, as it always had, shifted once more. The warmth began to return, but so did the challenges. The warming of the earth brought its own set of dangers. Rising seas, floods, droughts, and a landscape that, while more hospitable, was now filled with new threats. The world's ecology was shifting, and in many places entire ecosystems were collapsing. The megafauna that had once roamed the plains, the woolly mammoths, the giant ground sloths, the saber-toothed tigers, these creatures began to vanish, leaving behind only their bones as a testament to the world that had once been. The survivors found themselves in a world that no longer resembled the one they had known. The landscape, the climate, the animals, they were all changing. Yet in this new world they adapted once again, This was not the beginning of their story, but a continuation of a long saga, a saga that had already witnessed great struggles, innovations, and triumphs. The survivors, now scattered across a more temperate earth, learned to cultivate the land. They learned the rhythms of the seasons, not just through survival, but through cultivation. The first domesticated plants, grains, fruits, vegetables were planted, and with them came a new form of society. No longer did they need to roam the land as hunters and gatherers. They began to settle, to form villages, to create communities where knowledge and culture could flourish. But this new way of life came with its own set of challenges. The land that had once been a vast wilderness to explore was now becoming a battleground for resources. The earth, though no longer frozen, was still unforgiving. As the climate warmed and the seas rose, groups of people began to clash, fighting over fertile land, over water sources, over food. The struggles that had once been centered around survival were now centered around dominance, power, and control. Yet, in the midst of these new challenges, humanity proved its resilience once again. The fires that had once burned in the caves now burned in the heart of growing villages. These were not just fires for survival, they were fires for civilization. The tools that had once been crafted to hunt and gather were now used to build cities, to create art, to forge the foundations of a new world. The humans, ever adaptable, had learned that their strength lay not in their ability to endure hardship alone, but in their capacity to learn, to grow, and to evolve. Their creativity was their greatest weapon, their greatest tool for survival. They discovered the art of storytelling, passing down their history, their culture, their very essence from one generation to the next. The cave paintings of old gave way to written records, the oral traditions to written language. They had learned to express not just their needs, but their hopes, their dreams, their fears. This was not the beginning of humanity's story, but a continuation of a journey that spanned millennia. Through every crisis, whether it was the deep freeze of the Ice Age or the scorching heat of the desert, they had found a way to endure, to adapt, and to thrive. They had learned that survival was not just a matter of physical endurance, but of mental and emotional strength. And as they looked to the future, as they gazed upon the changing world around them, they knew one thing for certain. Humanity had only just begun to scratch the surface of its potential. From the depths of the Ice Age to the warming earth, from the survival of the fittest to the rise of civilizations, the human story was one of relentless adaptation. It was a story of triumph against all odds, of a species that had faced the very forces of nature and emerged not broken, but stronger. And as they moved forward, as the world continued to change, one truth remained. Humanity would always find a way to survive. The crises would come, the challenges would mount, but as long as the fires burned in their hearts, humanity would continue to adapt. The story of human survival was far from over. It was a story that would continue to unfold, with each generation adding its own chapter to the tale of resilience, creativity, and hope. Through the ages, from the frozen wastelands to the warmth of the sunlit plains, humanity had proven that no matter the crisis, no matter the challenge, they would rise, they would adapt, and they would thrive. They had done so before, and they would do so again. The saga of survival, of adaptation, of humanity's unyielding will to endure was far from finished. It was an ongoing story, a story that had yet to reach its final chapter. And so, as the earth continued to shift and change, As new crises emerged and old ones faded, the human story marched on. With every challenge, with every new crisis, humanity would adapt. They would rise to meet the moment just as they had always done. The future, though uncertain, was theirs to shape, and no matter what the world threw at them, they would find a way to survive. The Ice Age, a world locked in frozen silence, where the winds howl like ancient ghosts across vast, barren landscapes, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Beneath the unforgiving cold, a people emerge, a small, resilient group of survivors struggling to make sense of a world in turmoil. The ground beneath their feet is harsh, unyielding, a reminder of the planet's raw power. This is the edge of human existence, where every day is a battle for survival, every step forward an act of defiance against nature's brutality. As glaciers advance, crushing everything in their path, humanity faces the ultimate test of endurance. But even in the heart of this merciless wilderness, there are signs of life, of ingenuity, of a spark that refuses to be extinguished. The human spirit is bound by one truth. Survival is not enough. It is the will to thrive, to adapt, that defines us. They know the dangers. Mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, the creeping ice that threatens to swallow their world. Yet in this frozen landscape, they find ways to fight back. They craft tools from stone, bone, and wood, primitive, yet powerful in their hands. These are not just tools for survival. They are symbols of hope, a testament to humanity's ability to shape the world, to bend it to their will. As the earth trembles and shifts, so too does the human race. Migration begins. With each step, they push against the boundaries of their world, seeking out new lands, new opportunities. Across the Beringia land bridge, they move, footsteps etched in snow, crossing from Asia into the unknown expanse of North America. The cold is relentless, but their determination is fiercer. They are not simply crossing a bridge of ice. They are crossing into a new era. They face predators, starvation, freezing nights, but they endure. It is here, in this harsh environment, that the seeds of human expansion are sown. From this moment, humanity will spread, adapting to deserts, to jungles, to mountains, creating a tapestry of cultures, each one a reflection of the land it calls home. In Europe, the same struggle unfolds. As the glaciers recede, the land is barren, scarred by the passage of ice. But the survivors, their numbers growing, begin to carve out a life from the rubble. They hunt, gather, and build, creating small settlements that dot the landscape like beacons of defiance against the dark. The cold still bites at their heels, but they persevere. They learn to master fire, to create art, to forge tools that allow them to thrive in even the most hostile conditions. But it is not just survival that drives them. It is the need to connect, to share, to create. They paint on cave walls, leaving behind stories for generations, yet unborn. The first steps of cultural expression take root here, in the midst of chaos, of uncertainty. These paintings are not mere decoration. They are messages, signs of life in a world that seems intent on snuffing it out. The human spirit, it seems, cannot be broken. And then, as humanity spreads across the globe, they face new challenges, vast deserts that stretch out like oceans of sand, jungles that choke with life, mountains that rise up like the very walls of the earth. But the same creativity, the same resilience carries them forward. In the desert, they learn to harness the wind, to store water in clay pots, to build dwellings that shield them from the sun's relentless heat. In the jungle, they build tools for hunting, for fishing, for gathering. They adapt. They thrive. Across the oceans, a different migration unfolds. The Polynesians, masters of the sea, sail across vast stretches of water, guided only by the stars, their craft enduring the harshest storms. They reach distant islands, each one an oasis in the ocean's endless expanse, each one an opportunity for new beginnings. The world is vast, yet humanity's reach extends further with each passing year. They adapt to new territories, and the lands they touch become a testament to their ability to transform the environment. In the Americas, they carve out homes in the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, in the arid deserts of the Southwest, and in the vast plains of the Great Basin. They learn the rhythms of the land, the movements of the animals, the cycles of the seasons. They develop new ways of hunting, new tools, new ways of living. Their cultures grow rich with the legacy of survival, of creativity, of deep connection to the land. They craft intricate baskets, carve beautiful totem poles, weave vibrant fabrics, each item a reflection of their understanding of the world around them. They thrive where others might have faltered. And yet, despite the success of these migrations, there are still obstacles to overcome. The earth continues to shift. The climate grows unpredictable. Volcanic eruptions change the landscape, sending ash into the skies, blocking out the sun. Earthquakes ripple through the land, altering coastlines, destroying cities. But humanity responds once again with innovation. In the face of such catastrophes, new technologies are born. They learn to create better shelters, to harness fire in new ways, to adapt their tools to new challenges. In the shadow of destruction, they find hope. Even as the environment becomes more hostile, humanity's ingenuity flourishes. In the Arctic, the first signs of agriculture appear, a testament to the human drive to conquer the land. In the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia, civilizations rise, bringing with them new ideas, new technologies, and a new understanding of the world. They write stories, they build cities, they create systems of government and trade. And yet, even as they build, they are still driven by the same primal forces: survival, connection, adaptation. These are the roots of our civilization, planted in the cold, the heat, the storms, and the quiet of the earth's deepest recesses. They are the fruits of human resilience, of the ability to face every challenge, every disaster, and emerge stronger. With each migration, each settlement, humanity grows. The landscapes they touch are forever changed, their cultures woven into the fabric of the earth. They are not just surviving, they are creating something greater, something lasting. They are crafting the future, one step at a time. As the years pass, the journey continues, and so too does humanity's expansion across the globe. It is not merely a physical journey. It is a journey of the spirit, of the mind, of the very essence of what it means to be human. Every place they touch becomes a part of them, and every step they take is a testament to their ability to adapt, to overcome, and to thrive. This is not just the story of survival. This is the story of human triumph over adversity, of the indomitable will to thrive, to create, and to live. And as we stand today, looking back at this epic journey, we see that what began in the frozen wastes of the Ice Age continues to shape us. The paths they carved across the earth are the paths we walk today, and the legacy of their resilience, their creativity, and their ingenuity lives on in us all. From the desolate deserts of the past to the sprawling cities of the modern world, Humanity's journey is far from over. It is a story still unfolding, one that will continue for generations to come. The world trembled under the weight of change. The skies darkened with thick, ominous clouds, blotting out the sun for what seemed like an eternity. The winds howled across the barren landscapes, bringing with them an unmistakable chill, as though the earth itself had decided to close its doors to humanity. It was a time of unimaginable challenge, when survival teetered on the edge of a blade. The younger Dryas had come. In an instant, temperatures plummeted, and the delicate balance of life was shattered. The world was thrown into chaos, as humans faced their greatest trial, a test that would determine whether they would endure or fade into history. The once fertile lands, teeming with life, became vast stretches of ice and snow, unforgiving and inhospitable. The animals that had roamed freely, a constant source of food, were now scarce, driven away by the freezing temperatures and vanishing resources. The forests that had provided shelter and warmth were consumed by the relentless cold, their leaves turning to frost. Humanity, fragile and vulnerable, was pushed to its limits, struggling against nature's fury. But even in the face of such overwhelming adversity, something remarkable began to emerge. The spark of human ingenuity, that indomitable will to survive, flickered alive once more. The men and women of this time, bound by necessity and desperation, gathered together in their small communities, relying on each other for warmth, for sustenance, and for hope. Every tool, every weapon, every piece of shelter was crafted with meticulous care, born of necessity and born out of the harsh demands of survival. Each moment, a battle. The sound of stone scraping against stone filled the air as flint was struck to create fire, the first light in the darkness. A fire that would not only warm their bodies but also ignite their spirits, giving them the strength to face another night, another storm. The cold was relentless, but so too was their resolve. They huddled close, their faces drawn and pale, yet there was warmth in their eyes, a shared understanding that they were not alone. Together they persevered. Even as the storm raged outside, inside their shelters, the flicker of flames cast long shadows, making their survival feel like a defiant act against nature's cruelty. There was a rhythm to life, a strange sense of order amidst the chaos. People adapted. They crafted new tools from the bones and hides of the animals they hunted. They learned to sew the thick pelts together, creating garments that could shield them from the biting cold. Their breath turned to mist in the frozen air, but the warmth of their bodies, the fire, and the ever-present bond of family kept them moving forward. Every day a new challenge awaited. The food they hunted became scarcer, and yet they found ways to adapt. They learned to follow the herds, to track the animals through the snow, their skills honed to near perfection. Every kill was a victory, every meal a reminder that survival was still possible. The storm outside was fierce, but inside they found strength in each other. There were moments of laughter, of song, even as the world seemed determined to consume them. A child's first steps were celebrated, the birth of a new life, a defiant triumph against the harshness of the world. The scent of animal fat burned for warmth, mingled with the air of fresh snow outside, the smell of survival, of life clinging to the edge of existence. But it was not only the immediate threats that loomed large. The climate itself was shifting, changing at a pace they could scarcely understand. The ground froze beneath their feet, rivers ran dry, and the world seemed to fall into a long, dark slumber. The land they had once known was no more, and with it the future they had once envisioned seemed to dissolve into the cold abyss. Yet, despite the darkness, there were glimpses of hope. The human spirit, unyielding and tireless, continued to find ways to fight back. Every new tool, every innovation, was a testament to their survival. They had no choice but to adapt, to find solutions, to reinvent themselves in the face of overwhelming odds. The cold would not last forever, and even in the darkest moments there was a sense of awe, a reverence for the resilience that coursed through the veins of these people. Across the world, in caves and shelters, across icy plains and vast deserts, humanity was changing, evolving. They had no map, no clear way forward, but they kept moving. The younger Dryas was a nightmare, a relentless winter that tested every human on Earth, but it was also a time of growth, of adaptation, and ultimately of triumph. For those who endured, the future would hold the promise of a world reborn. The storms would pass, the ice would recede, and from the ashes of the frozen earth, a new dawn would rise. Humanity had not only survived, it had evolved. It had learned to thrive in a world that had nearly destroyed it. And in the face of such unimaginable adversity, humanity's greatest triumph was not in conquering nature, but in the simple, powerful truth that they had made it through together. It was the story of a people who had stared down the abyss and emerged victorious, their spirits unbroken, their will unyielding. The younger Dryas had tried to end them, but instead it had forged them into something stronger, more resilient, and more capable than ever before. It had taught them the most important lesson of all, that even in the darkest times the human spirit can find light, can find hope, can find a way to endure. And this was their story, a story of survival, of ingenuity, and of the relentless will to persevere, even when the world seemed to be collapsing all around them. This was the moment when humanity proved that no matter how dire the circumstances, they would always find a way to rise again, because that is the true nature of human resilience. But this was no isolated event, no simple chapter in human history. It was part of a greater tapestry of survival, woven over millennia, threaded through the very bones of the earth itself. The younger Dryas had been a cataclysmic event, yes, but it was also a continuation of a larger story, one that stretched back to the dawn of humanity. And even as the last great ice storm subsided, leaving the earth in a fragile state of recovery, there were whispers of something even greater, something that would push the human spirit even further. The earth was changing, but so too was humanity. Over generations, the survivors of the younger Dryas would evolve. Their bodies would adapt to the new climates. Their cultures would shift to accommodate the changes in their environment, and their societies would find new ways to thrive. It was a slow, almost imperceptible process at first, but the seeds of something extraordinary had been planted in the cold, harsh years that followed the younger Dryas. Communities that had once relied on sheer strength and endurance now began to focus on cooperation, on the collective power of many working toward a single goal. The tools they crafted became more refined, more specialized, as the art of survival became a shared pursuit. They began to form bonds that transcended the need for mere survival bonds of trade, of culture, of mutual respect. As the glaciers retreated and the land began to heal, so too did humanity's understanding of the world around them. They learned to read the land with greater accuracy, to track the movements of animals, and to predict the shifts in the weather. They began to understand the intricate dance between nature and survival, forging a deeper connection to the world around them. And in this new world there was room for innovation. For the first time in history, humans began to shape their environment, using fire to clear land, building shelter to withstand the elements, and harnessing the power of plants and animals in ways that had once seemed impossible. These were the early roots of agriculture, a transformative shift that would set the stage for the rise of cities, the development of writing, and the growth of civilization itself. The Younger Dryas had been a crucible, a testing ground, but from its fires humanity emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than ever before. They had stared into the heart of destruction and had chosen life. They had adapted, and they would continue to do so, for the story of humanity was far from over. It was a story that would continue to unfold, shaped by the resilience of the human spirit and the unyielding force of nature itself. And as the world continued to warm and the ice receded, new challenges would emerge, ones that would push humanity to its limits once more. But in the face of whatever came next, humanity had already proven its greatest strength, the ability to endure, to adapt, and to rise again, no matter how dark the future seemed. This was the legacy of the Younger Dryas, a time when humanity was tested, but ultimately when it proved that survival was not just about enduring the cold, but about learning to live in a world that could never again be taken for granted. And as the world turned, as the centuries passed, the memory of those who survived the Younger Dryas would live on, woven into the fabric of every generation that followed. It was a story of survival, of adaptation, and of the triumph of the human spirit, a story that would echo through the ages, reminding all who came after that no matter how harsh the world became, humanity would always find a way to endure, to adapt, and to rise. In the face of a world reshaped by forces beyond human comprehension, the survival of humanity seemed almost miraculous. The brutal cold of the Ice Age, a time when vast stretches of land were frozen beneath thick blankets of ice, seemed unyielding. The freezing winds of the Younger Dryas triggered catastrophic shifts in climate, plunging the earth into an era of unparalleled hardship. Yet, even amidst this suffocating cold, humanity found the warmth of survival in the most unexpected of places. It was not in the lands where the sun once reigned supreme, nor in the seas that had once been teeming with life, but within the hearts of those who refused to give up. They were the ones who stood resilient against the fury of nature's wrath, whose resourcefulness and strength would forever alter the course of human history. The temperature dropped sharply, some estimates putting it as much as 10 degrees Celsius in a matter of decades, and the world that had once been abundant with forests, rivers, and lakes now faced the steady march of ice. Crops failed, and the animals that once grazed freely on the open plains were driven to extinction or retreat into more remote corners of the earth. For humans, the environment became a merciless enemy, one that they could not outrun. Yet in this very adversity, something extraordinary was born. As the chill of the Ice Age tightened its grip, humans adapted in ways that would make their ancestors unrecognizable. The small, tight-knit bands of hunter-gatherers who had roamed the plains were now forced into even more inhospitable terrains, driven by necessity to craft tools and shelter in ways they had never before imagined. The creation of advanced stone tools marked a turning point, and with it the survival of countless lives. Humans became masters of their environment in ways that even nature itself could not predict. Early tools, simple yet ingenious, allowed them to butcher animals more efficiently, build more secure shelters, and defend themselves against predators. But survival was not simply a matter of physical endurance. It was also a testament to human creativity and emotional resilience. The caves that once served as mere shelters for early humans soon became the canvases for their deepest expressions of culture and meaning. In the flickering light of fire, the first paintings were etched onto cave walls. These were not just mere drawings. They were a reflection of human connection to the world around them. There, in the darkness of the caves, humanity's ability to dream and to create something greater than mere survival began to emerge. Every brushstroke, every carving told the story of a people who, even in the face of death, sought to leave their mark on the world. But the struggle for survival did not stop at art. As humans learned to work together in larger groups, they began to develop new ways of organizing their communities, creating alliances that spanned across vast territories. It was in these new social structures that humanity's true strength began to shine. As the world cooled, humans warmed one another with their shared bonds, their collective spirit. In the face of uncertainty, they learned to celebrate the small moments of joy that life still offered. There were rituals around the fire, moments of laughter in the face of darkness, and a deep-seated belief that no matter how cold the world became, they would survive. They gathered their strength from one another, and from this collective power, a new world began to emerge. Meanwhile, as the Ice Age continued to unfold, the Earth itself was not static. The shifting of the planet's ecosystems created new challenges and opportunities. As the glaciers advanced and retreated, they left behind fertile soil and new landscapes for humanity to conquer. In this environment of upheaval, the seeds of agriculture were sown. The domestication of animals and the cultivation of crops became the bedrock upon which civilizations would later rise. From the frozen tundras of Siberia to the Fertile Crescent, humans began to reshape the very land beneath their feet, turning barren soil into fields of abundance. The process was slow but steady. The shift from hunter-gatherer societies to settled agricultural communities marked the beginning of a new era, one in which the survival of the fittest was no longer determined solely by strength, but by intelligence, innovation, and adaptability. The story of humanity's survival during the Ice Age is not just one of enduring physical hardship. It is also a story of ingenuity, creativity, and cooperation. As the world transformed, so too did humanity. And with each challenge, whether it was the freezing winds of the Younger Dryas or the collapse of ecosystems, humans found a way to thrive. They didn't simply endure, they transcended. They learned to tame the elements, to harvest the earth, and to forge bonds that would carry them into the future. By the time the Ice Age began to wane, humanity had already laid the foundation for a new World One, where cities would rise, where agriculture would feed billions, and where the human spirit would continue to adapt and thrive. This was not just survival. This was the birth of civilization itself. In the face of nature's harshest tests, humanity had found a way not only to survive, but to build something that would endure for millennia to come. The legacy of those who lived through this great test of endurance and resilience is one that we still feel today. It is in our ability to adapt to change, to learn from our struggles, and to create something better from the ashes of destruction. It is in the stories we tell, the art we create, and the communities we build. And perhaps most importantly, it is in the understanding that, no matter how cold the world may be, there is nothing more powerful than the will to survive, the drive to innovate, and the strength that comes from standing together. From the glaciers that once threatened to wipe out all life, to the civilizations that arose in their wake, humanity's journey is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It is a story of triumph over adversity, of survival against all odds, and of the extraordinary power of human ingenuity. It is a story that continues to unfold, one where the lessons of the past are woven into the fabric of the future. As we look to the stars, as we explore the unknown frontiers of space and time, we carry with us the knowledge that no matter what challenges lie ahead, we have the capacity to overcome them. Just as our ancestors endured the harshest conditions on Earth, so too will we face the future with the same spirit of survival, creativity, and unshakable will. And so, as the story of humanity unfolds, let us remember that our greatest legacy is not in the monuments we build or the empires we create, but in the indomitable spirit that lies at the heart of who we are, the spirit that will carry us through whatever comes next, just as it carried our ancestors through the Ice Age and beyond. The spirit that will always find a way to survive, to thrive, and to leave a mark on the world, no matter how cold the winds may blow. The struggle for survival continued long after the last glaciers receded. With the earth warming, a new challenge emerged: how to adapt to a rapidly changing world, where previously fertile lands became deserts, and the waters that once nourished life began to recede. Yet humanity's resilience was unmatched. The lessons learned during the brutal days of the Ice Age became the foundation upon which future generations would build. Humans began to harness the power of fire, not only for warmth but to shape their world in ways that were previously unimaginable. They crafted tools with sharper edges, invented new ways to weave cloth, and discovered methods to store food, ensuring they could withstand periods of scarcity. Agriculture, born from necessity, began to flourish. Fields of wheat and barley stretched across vast regions, and the domestication of animals provided a steady source of food. This shift in lifestyle brought with it not just survival, but the promise of progress. The need for constant movement, once dictated by the whims of nature, gave way to the stability of permanent settlements. With this new stability, humans could focus on innovation, building homes that could withstand the elements, creating villages that would grow into towns, and eventually laying the foundation for the great cities that would mark the rise of civilization. These early settlements, born from the fires of struggle and survival, would eventually give birth to the mighty empires that would rule the earth for centuries. The Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Indus Valley civilizations, all built upon the knowledge passed down from generations who had lived through the most difficult chapters of human history. The story of their rise was one of triumph, but it was also a story of how humanity in its darkest hour discovered its greatest strengths. The lessons of resilience, adaptability, and cooperation that were forged during the Ice Age were passed down through the ages, becoming the core principles upon which human societies would thrive. The hardships faced by our ancestors were not in vain. Through their struggles, they not only ensured their survival, but paved the way for the advancements that would define the future of humanity. And so, as we look at the world today, at the cities, the technology, and the vast networks of human cooperation, we must remember the roots from which they grew. It is in the fires of adversity, in the moments of darkness, that the brightest sparks of human ingenuity were born. The challenges we face today may seem insurmountable, but just as our ancestors overcame the unimaginable trials of the Ice Age, so too can we rise to meet the challenges of our own time. The story of humanity is far from over, and the legacy of survival, creativity, and resilience will continue to shape our future in ways we can only begin to imagine. With every challenge we face, we build upon the foundation laid by those who came before us, and we carry forward the lessons they imparted. The end. The echoes of survival reverberate through time, a timeless narrative woven from the very fabric of human history. In the ice-choked landscapes where the last remnants of the Ice Age clung to existence, humanity's struggle for survival was not simply a battle against nature, but an intricate dance with destiny. The Younger Dryas, a dramatic shift in Earth's climate, when the warmth of a flourishing world was suddenly snatched away, plunging the planet back into an unforgiving cold. In these harrowing moments, humanity's resilience was not born from a desire to conquer nature, but from the sheer necessity of endurance. The deep freeze encased the world, and for those living on its edge, life was a daily negotiation with death. Yet within this frozen wasteland, the human spirit ignited a small flame in the midst of an all-consuming cold. Around fires in caves darkened by ice and shadow, a community of survivors clung to life, their bodies weary from the biting winds, but their hearts full of resolve. They were not simply enduring, they were adapting. They were learning to bend with the wind, to shape the cold into something useful, to find warmth in the simplest of things. They were becoming artisans, tool-makers, storytellers, creating the very things that would allow them to navigate this brutal world. In their hands, stone became more than just a tool. It became a lifeline, a symbol of humanity's boundless ingenuity. The art that adorned their walls, paintings of bison, of wild beasts and creatures now extinct, was not merely decoration. It was survival, a reminder of what once was and perhaps a prayer for what could still be. The harsh world they inhabited was reflected in every stroke, every curve of the bone, every carefully crafted spear. It was a world where nothing was given, and everything had to be earned. Yet amid the relentless cold, a sense of warmth emerged, a warmth that was not just found in fire, but in the bonds between people. Families huddled together, not just to survive, but to share stories, to celebrate the small victories of each day. They knew the weight of their existence was not simply in their survival, but in the survival of their community. The collective effort, the shared strength, was what held them together. These were the days when human connection transcended mere bloodlines. The unity of survival was greater than the individual will. The creative mind of the human spirit came alive in these moments, even as the earth below them trembled with the fury of a changing climate. There, in the heart of darkness, when the world seemed on the brink of collapse, humanity found its voice. It sang in the wind, it danced in the fires, and it whispered through the cracks in the ice. The ancient struggle of survival unfolded in ways unseen and unheard by those who did not endure. And though the cold was biting, the spirit was unyielding. We know now from the bones of the past, from the tools they left behind, and the art they created, that they were not merely surviving, They were laying the foundation for everything that would come after them. They were the architects of resilience, the first to show that human survival was not a passive act, but an active, creative force. This is not just the story of those who lived thousands of years ago. It is the story of all who have come after them, including us. The lessons of their struggle echo in our own times as we face our own climate challenges, our own crises. Just as the Earth's temperature fluctuated in the past, so too does it fluctuate now. Global warming, environmental destruction, the depletion of resources, these are the battles of our age, but the struggle is not new. The names of the battles may have changed, but the warriors remain the same. It is us, the inheritors of a legacy of survival. And just as those before us learned to create fire from the cold, we too must find our own means of survival in a world that is increasingly inhospitable. The struggles of the past were not without triumphs. We are living in the legacy of their victories. The global migrations that followed, the rise of civilizations, the technological advancements that have shaped the modern world, all are born from the foundation laid by those ancient survivors. Through the frostbitten wastelands of their existence, they forged a path forward, driven not by the certainty of tomorrow, but by the hope of a future they might never see. Their struggle was not in vain. Every tool they crafted, every piece of art they etched, every word they spoke around the fire was a building block for the world that came after. In the same way, the choices we make today, the innovations we create, the communities we build, will shape the world that comes tomorrow. We are part of this ongoing narrative of survival, of resilience. Just as the Ice Age gave way to the warming climate and the rise of new life, so too will the challenges of our time pass, making way for a new dawn. But that dawn is not inevitable. It is something we must work for. It is something we must create. We have the tools, the knowledge, the spirit of survival that has been passed down through generations. It is our responsibility to take what has been handed to us and use it wisely, to continue the work of those who came before, to preserve the fragile balance of the world that sustains us, and to ensure that the human story is one of continued adaptation and thriving. The world is changing once again. The climate shifts, the landscape transforms, and once again, humanity is called upon to face the unknown. But we are not without resources. We are not without hope. We have the wisdom of the past to guide us, the ingenuity of the present to shape our path, and the resilience of the human spirit to carry us forward. And so, as we look to the future, we do not look with fear, but with determination. For the spirit of survival that has carried us through the harshest of times is still within us. It is not the cold that defines us, nor the storms that threaten to tear us apart. It is the fire that burns within, the creativity that flows through our veins, and the unity that binds us together. We are the children of those who survived the Ice Age, of those who endured the great cold, and emerged stronger, more creative, more determined. The future belongs to those who, when faced with adversity, find the strength to rise, to adapt, and to thrive. The struggles of the past were not just moments in history. They were the beginning of an ongoing journey, one that continues to this day and will continue far into the future. The legacy of survival, of resilience, of creativity and hope will not be forgotten. It will live on in every innovation, in every community, in every individual who dares to dream of a better world. And as the earth continues to change, as the winds shift and the temperatures rise and fall, one thing remains certain: humanity will endure. The story of survival is not a story of surrender. It is a story of victory, of triumph over adversity, of the indomitable will to live. It is a story that continues to unfold from one generation to the next, from one challenge to the next. And as long as we continue to rise, to adapt, and to thrive, the story will never end. And yet, as the winds howled and the world seemed to unravel before their eyes, humanity's resilience was not merely a passive response to adversity. It was a dynamic force, an evolving strategy that stretched across generations, driven by an unspoken promise of survival that echoed in the hearts of all who dared to exist in this harsh and unforgiving world. The story of humanity's fight against the cold, against nature's unyielding grip, is not a tale confined to the past. It is a continuing saga, unfolding in the very moment we live, a legacy carried through time, shaping the path we walk today. In the frozen expanse of the Ice Age, when the sun's light seemed too distant to offer hope, the shadows of survival loomed larger than ever. But in that darkness, humanity's brightest spark emerged, not from a place of certainty, but from the crucible of uncertainty itself. This was not merely the struggle for survival of the fittest. It was the struggle for survival of the most resourceful, the most creative, the most tenacious. With each ice storm that battered their shelters, each shift in the climate that threatened to wipe them from existence, humanity found new ways to adapt. They sculpted tools from bones and stones, crafted shelters from hides and branches, and, most remarkably of all, they crafted stories that bound them together, stories that kept their spirits alive even as the very world seemed determined to erase them. These stories, passed down through generations, were more than just words. They were lifeblood. They were the glue that held fractured families and tribes together, providing meaning in a world where survival was the ultimate currency. And as the years turned into centuries, these stories became the foundation for an unbroken chain of human endeavor, reaching forward into a future that, to them, seemed as uncertain as the storms that had shaped their world. But these storms, these battles with nature, were not the only forces shaping their fate. Within the caverns of the earth, beneath layers of ice and stone, humanity discovered something far more profound than mere survival. They discovered community. They discovered that no matter how harsh the winds blew, no matter how deep the snow drifted, there was something more powerful than the forces of nature itself, the strength of the human connection. In the flickering glow of firelight, families huddled together, their faces painted with the marks of their ancestors, their hearts beating as one, united by a shared purpose. It was in these quiet moments, under the weight of a world that sought to consume them, that they found their truest strength. They were not just individuals battling the elements. They were a collective force, bound by a common cause, driven by an instinct that transcended mere survival. The bond between parent and child, between sibling and sibling, between friend and friend, became their greatest weapon. For in unity there was power, and in that power there was hope. As the years passed, the world began to change again. The glaciers, which had once been a constant companion, began to retreat, but the struggle to survive did not end. Instead, it transformed. New challenges arose, challenges that would test humanity in ways no one could predict. The thawing of the Ice Age brought new possibilities, but also new threats. With the warming world came new dangers, unfamiliar animals, diseases that spread like wildfire, and the challenge of adapting to an ever-changing landscape. Yet, through it all, humanity did what it had always done, adapted. The tools they had once carved from bone and stone now gave way to the innovation of agriculture, the domestication of animals, the birth of new technologies that would allow them to bend the forces of nature to their will. But even as they thrived, even as they built civilizations that reached toward the heavens, the legacy of that ancient struggle remained. It echoed in the bones of the ancestors, in the caves where they once huddled for warmth, in the stories that were passed down from generation to generation. And as the centuries passed, those stories became more than just legends. They became a living, breathing testament to humanity's unyielding will to survive. But survival, it seemed, was not enough. As humanity's power grew, so did its questions. What was the purpose of this struggle? What lay beyond the horizon of survival? Was it enough to merely exist, to endure? Or was there something more, something greater, waiting to be discovered? And so, in the shadow of their ancestors, humanity began to look not just at the world they had conquered, but at the future that lay ahead. It was a future filled with uncertainty, yes, but also filled with possibility. A future where the same drive that had once led them to carve bone and stone into tools could now propel them to the stars. But this future was not without its own struggles, for with progress came new challenges. As the world warmed, as humanity spread across the globe, the natural world shifted once more, and once again humanity found itself tested. But this time the struggle was different. This time the battle was not just against the cold, not just against the shifting earth, but against themselves, against the very nature of their existence. With the rise of civilizations came the rise of inequality, of power struggles, of conflict between those who sought to dominate and those who sought to resist. The challenges of survival were no longer just about food and shelter, but about the preservation of identity, of culture, of the very ideals that had sustained them through the darkest of times. As the world faced the rise and fall of empires, a clash of civilizations, the winds of war once again swept across the earth, and once again humanity found itself standing at the precipice, facing the same questions that had haunted their ancestors. Would they survive? Would they rise again? But as the world burned, as civilizations crumbled beneath the weight of their own ambitions, something remarkable happened. The human spirit, though battered, though broken, refused to yield. Amidst the devastation, there were those who rose, who built, who dreamed. There were those who, like their ancestors before them, found light in the darkest of times. They rebuilt not just cities, but societies. They reimagined the very concept of what it meant to be human. They created art, music, literature reminders that even in the face of destruction, the human soul could not be extinguished. And as the centuries passed, the lessons of the past became clearer. They were not just survivalists, they were creators. They were innovators, they were dreamers. And it was this spirit, this unyielding drive to create, to evolve, that would carry them forward. For the future was not some distant land to be discovered. It was a future that began in the hearts of those who dared to dream. But the struggle was not over. It would never be over. Just as the world had tested their ancestors, so too would the world continue to test them. But they were ready. They had learned the most important lesson of all, that survival was not just about fighting against the forces of nature. It was about fighting for something greater. It was about fighting for the future. And so, as the world turned, as the sun rose and set, as the tides of time carried them forward, humanity continued to rise again and again, determined to meet the challenges that lay ahead. And in the end, it was not the cold that had shaped them, nor the storms that had battered them, but the fire that burned within their hearts, the fire of creation, the fire of unity, the fire of survival. And as long as that fire burned, humanity would never stop. They would rise, they would adapt, they would thrive. The fire that burned within them was not a simple flame. It was the relentless spark of discovery, of curiosity. What drove humanity to push beyond survival was something far deeper, an unquenchable thirst to understand, to evolve, to carve meaning out of an existence that had once seemed cruelly indifferent to their plight. This was the same drive that had once led them to conquer the elements, to wrestle fire from the rocks and shelter from the wind. But now the questions were different. Now the challenge was not merely to exist, but to know, to reach beyond the veil of the known and into the mystery that had for so long remained out of reach. As the generations passed, the world transformed in ways that had once been unimaginable. The glaciers retreated, the forests expanded, and the rivers that had once been frozen became highways of life. But alongside these changes came new frontiers of the human spirit, new places to explore, new boundaries to push, and new mysteries to unravel. And it was in this ever-changing world that humanity, ever relentless, sought to answer the questions that echoed in their hearts. What lay beyond the stars? Could they grasp the secrets of the universe? Could they shape their own destiny, not just in the fleeting moments of survival, but in the infinite expanse of time? Yet even as the spark of curiosity burned bright, there was something else that continued to haunt them, an echo of the ancient struggle. For the world, despite its progress, was still a place of uncertainty. The same storms that had once threatened to engulf them now returned in new forms, disguised as challenges that were far subtler, far more insidious. The battle against nature was no longer just against the cold or the beasts that stalked the night. Now it was a battle against time, against the very structure of existence itself. The fragile equilibrium they had so painstakingly created began to fracture. Empires rose and fell, civilizations rose and crumbled, and the shadow of their ancestors' struggle loomed large. Yet, even in the midst of this turmoil, humanity clung to the promise of progress. They clung to their fire of creation, their fire of unity. But now there was a new question, one that no one could yet answer. Would their creativity, their boundless innovation, be enough to carry them through the storms of their own making? For as much as they had learned to adapt, they had also learned to push the boundaries of their knowledge, and in doing so, they had unknowingly set forces in motion that they could not control. As the millennia passed, humanity's reach extended further into the world. They discovered new lands, new peoples, and new possibilities. They harnessed the power of the sun, the wind, and the earth, using these forces to fuel their dreams and ambitions. They built cities that touched the sky, created technologies that had once been the stuff of myth, and began to dream not just of survival, but of a future that was limitless. Yet, as they soared higher, so too did their fears grow. For with each new discovery, each new advancement, came the realization that they were not the masters of the world they had created, they were its stewards. And with stewardship came responsibility. The balance between creation and destruction became ever more delicate. The forces they had unleashed, the technologies they had harnessed, could either uplift them to new heights or consume them in the blink of an eye. As civilizations rose and the world became ever more interconnected, the fragility of existence became ever more apparent. The shadows of the past, of the ancient battles for survival, seemed to rise again in new forms. Climate change, resource depletion, and the growing divide between the haves and the have-nots all threatened to unravel the delicate fabric of human society. And yet, even in the face of these new challenges, humanity pressed forward. The fires of creation still burned bright. They had learned the hard way that survival alone was not enough, that there was a deeper purpose to their existence, a greater story that still had yet to be told. It was in the darkest hours, in the moments when it seemed all was lost, that the true strength of humanity revealed itself. The battles were no longer fought in the caves of their ancestors, nor against the cold that had once threatened to erase them. Now the fight was within themselves, and the world they had built. In this new age, survival was not enough. There had to be meaning. There had to be purpose. It was in these moments of uncertainty, when the world seemed on the brink of collapse, that the stories of the past came alive once again. For it was in these stories that humanity found not just survival, but the key to their future. The stories of their ancestors, passed down through the ages, were not just relics of a distant past. They were blueprints for a new beginning. They were reminders that no matter how dark the night, no matter how fierce the storm, the human spirit could never be extinguished. And so humanity found itself once again standing at a crossroads, facing the future with the same questions that had haunted their ancestors. What lay beyond the horizon? What was the true purpose of their existence? Could they truly shape the future, or were they doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past? But this time there was something different. This time they were not alone. The stories, the lessons, the wisdom of the past had been passed down, not just to be remembered, but to be lived. And as humanity looked to the future, they realized that the greatest challenge they faced was not one of survival, but of identity. What kind of world would they create? What kind of people would they become? It was no longer enough to simply survive. Now it was about creating a legacy not just of survival, but of thriving, a legacy of hope, of unity, of a world that, though flawed, was worth fighting for. As the fires of creation continued to burn bright, the winds of change swept across the world. New frontiers beckoned, and the answers to the questions that had once seemed so distant were now within reach. Humanity had reached the edge of a new era. But the question remained, would they be able to rise to the challenge? Would they be able to adapt, to evolve, to create a future that was worthy of their ancestors' struggles? Or would they falter, as so many before them had done, lost in the dark corners of history? The future, it seemed, was theirs for the taking, but only if they could rise to the occasion. The fire of creation still burned, but it was a fire that needed tending. And so, as the world turned, as the sun rose and set, humanity continued its eternal journey, a journey that was both a testament to their past and a promise for their future. It was a journey not just of survival, but of meaning, of purpose, and of the unyielding will to shape the world with their own hands. And as long as that fire burned, humanity would never stop. They would rise. They would adapt. They would thrive. For this, after all, was the legacy of their ancestors, the unbroken chain of struggle, creativity, and resilience that had carried them through the darkest of times and would carry them into the light of the future. Yet even as the horizon beckoned with promises of new beginnings, a subtle unease lingered, hanging in the air like a cloud before a storm. For while humanity had risen from the ashes of its ancestors' struggles, the world they had built seemed more fragile than ever before. The weight of their achievements was undeniable, but so too was the weight of their responsibilities. They had reached the stars, harnessed the power of the elements, and bent nature to their will, but was this power truly their own, or had they become its servants, bound by the very technologies they had created? The more they discovered, the more they realized how much they still did not understand. New frontiers were emerging, but they were not just geographical. They were intellectual, spiritual, and ethical. The quest for knowledge, which had once been driven by a simple desire to survive, had now evolved into a quest for meaning. But in this search for meaning, humanity had encountered a terrifying truth. Answers were not always what they seemed. The more they learned, the more questions arose. What was the purpose of the universe? Why were they here? Could they ever truly understand the nature of existence? These questions, once abstract, now felt more urgent than ever. The universe, once a vast and distant unknown, had come closer with each passing day, but the closer it came, the more elusive it seemed. The mysteries of the cosmos, which had once inspired wonder and awe, now inspired fear. What if the universe was not the benevolent place they had imagined? What if it was indifferent or worse, hostile? What if the very forces they had tapped into were not meant to be controlled? In the face of such uncertainty, humanity's greatest strength, its curiosity, became its greatest vulnerability. The thirst for knowledge, once a beacon of hope, now carried with it the potential for disaster. For every discovery there was a price to pay. For every advancement a new risk emerged. The fire that had once illuminated their path now cast long, dark shadows. And yet, despite the growing unease, humanity could not turn back. The fire burned too brightly within them, the spark of curiosity too strong to ignore. It was this very fire that had led them through the darkest times in history, that had propelled them to conquer the unknown. And so, even as they faced the growing specter of their own creations, they pressed forward, determined to answer the questions that had haunted them for millennia. But as they did, they began to realize that the answers they sought might not come in the form they expected. They might not be answers at all, but rather new questions that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves, their world, and the universe itself. These questions, like seeds planted in the soil of their collective consciousness, began to grow, taking root in the hearts and minds of those who dared to dream. What was the true nature of reality? Was it shaped by perception, or did it exist independently of human thought? Could they ever truly understand the forces that governed their existence, or were they forever bound to the limits of their own understanding? The more humanity sought to unravel the mysteries of the universe, the more they encountered paradox, his seemingly impossible contradictions that defied logic and reason. The more they sought to control the world around them, the more they realized how little they actually controlled. In their pursuit of mastery over nature, they had awakened forces beyond their comprehension. And with these forces came consequences. The fragile equilibrium they had fought so hard to maintain began to shift. The world they had built, once a beacon of human ingenuity, now seemed to teeter on the edge of collapse. Climate change, resource depletion, and the widening divide between rich and poor threatened to tear apart the fabric of society. And yet, amid the chaos, there was a glimmer of hope, a flicker of light in the darkness. For even in the face of their greatest challenges, humanity had not given up. The fire of creation still burned, though it was no longer just a spark of survival. It was a fire that sought to transcend the limits of the physical world, to create something greater than the sum of its parts. It was a fire that sought meaning in the face of meaninglessness, purpose in a world that seemed to offer none. And so, as the storm clouds gathered on the horizon, humanity found itself at a crossroads once again. The future stretched out before them, a vast and uncharted expanse, filled with both limitless potential and unimaginable peril. The questions they had once asked seemed small and insignificant in the face of what lay ahead. What had once been a search for survival was now a search for transcendence. But in the midst of this search, there was one question that remained at the forefront of their minds. Could they rise above the very forces they had set in motion? Could they adapt, evolve, and thrive in a world that seemed increasingly hostile to their existence? The answer, it seemed, was uncertain, for while humanity had proven time and again that it could endure, that it could survive even in the harshest of conditions, the future was no longer guaranteed. The challenges they faced were unlike any they had ever known. And yet, despite the uncertainty, there was something undeniable about the human spirit. It was a spirit that had weathered the storms of history, that had endured the trials of time, and that had, time and again, proven its resilience. This resilience, though, was not without its cost. The fire that had once burned so brightly now flickered with uncertainty, its light casting long shadows. The road ahead was unclear, and the questions that loomed over them seemed endless. But even in the face of these unknowns, humanity pressed forward, driven by a force that could not be extinguished. They would continue to ask the questions, to seek the answers, to push the boundaries of knowledge and understanding. They would continue to reach for the stars, even if they could not yet touch them. They would continue to create, to build, and to dream. And in doing so, they would carry the legacy of their ancestors with them, not as a burden, but as a guiding light. For the greatest legacy of all, humanity realized, was not in the answers they found, but in the questions they continued to ask. The story of their survival, their struggle, and their triumphs was not yet finished. It was a story that would stretch across time, that would echo through the ages, and that would be told by those who came after them. And as long as the fire of curiosity burned within them, the journey would never truly end. They would rise, they would adapt, they would thrive, and in the end they would transcend. For that was the ultimate promise of the human spirit, an unyielding drive to evolve, to understand, and to create a world that was worthy of their infinite potential. The road ahead was long and the challenges great, but with every step humanity would move closer to a future that was as boundless as their imagination, a future where the answers to their deepest questions might not be found, but where the journey itself would be the answer. The fire of creation still burned, and with it the promise of a new dawn. The journey was far from over. It was only just beginning,